In Parshat Bo, we are introduced to the central aspects of the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, that the Israelites are to take a lamb and roast it over the fire and eat it with matzah and maror on Seder night, on the first night of Passover. The central verses having to do with how we're supposed to cook that lamb are Exodus chapter 12, verse 8 and 9. Va'achlu et basar b'layla hazeh. You should eat the meat on this night. Tzli eish umatzot al morim yochluhu. It should be roasted over a fire. You're going to eat it with matzah and maror. Verse 9. Al tochlu mimenu na. Do not eat of it raw. Uvashel mivushal b'mayim. Nor should you eat of it cooked in water. Ki im tzli eish. But rather, you must have it roasted over the fire. There are a variety of midrashim halacha, of rabbinic commentaries that delve into the legal aspects and the technical aspects of how this cooking is supposed to take place. The Torah Temimah cites many of them, and we're going to focus on one taken from Tractate Pesachim 41a. It's a discussion of Rav Chisda. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Pesach shabishlu b'chamei Tiberia, a paschal lamb, a Pesach offering, Korban Pesach, that was cooked in the waters of Tiberia. Now, the waters of Tiberia, this was a hot spring that is in Tiberias, Tiberia, very hot water, which you could conceivably cook food in. So what would happen if you would cook the paschal lamb in that water? So you might think, well, because the Torah said don't cook it in water, but what about these hot springs? Chayav, no, that would be prohibited. You would have violated the Torah law. Were you to do that? Shavar mishum tzli eish. You will have violated the law of having to have roasted the Passover offering in the fire. So cooking it, including cooking it in Chamei Tiberia, is problematic. So the Torah Temimah now discusses this midrash halacha, this rabbinic commentary, this legal take. First, Torah Temimah makes a clarification. Lashon hamivashel lav dafka. First of all, when Rav Chisda in the Gemara says that cooking it in the waters of Tiberia, the hot water of Tiberia, can't really mean cooking it. De'im kain mai nafka mina bein chamei Tiberia l'mayim acherim. Because we already know you can't cook in water. It didn't need to tell us that you can't cook in this particular water. We know you can't cook in water. So it must have been adding a new idea. Ella ratzon lamar shetzola al gabe hahevel hayotze mechamei Tiberia. So this is a very particular ruling that the Gemara wants to rule out, which is that the steam which rises off of the hot springs of Tiberia, that's what you can't cook in. V'asr mishum de be'inan tzli eish, because that too would violate the necessity of roasting over the fire. So, first thing says, don't think it means cooking in the water itself. It means cooking in the steam that's rising out of the hot springs. But now he adds a second discussion. And he says that he found a question raised in one of the commentaries on the Gemara. And in most standard versions of the Vilna Shas, the Vilna edition of the Talmud, there is a commentary in the back. You can sort of see the title here, called the Mare Kohen. The Mare Kohen was written by Rav Betzalel HaKohen of Vilna in the 19th century. He was a Torah scholar, as was his brother, as was his father. And he has an ongoing commentary of insights and questions throughout the Talmud. And the Torah Temimah cites a question of the Mare Kohen here on the Gemara that we discussed in Pesachim 41a. So let's see what the Mare Kohen asks on that Gemara. And then the Torah Temimah is going to discuss the Mare Kohen's questions and answers when we're done. So first, the Mare Kohen says as follows. He says, I don't understand Rav Chisda's question in the Gemara. where he says, can you cook a Korban Pesach in the hot waters of Tiberias? Aside from the halachic legal question of whether cooking in the hot springs themselves would be problematic, there's a different problem with this idea. What? Heich mishkachat la hachdina de Pesach shabishulu b'chamei Tiberia. How could you even think to pose the question of cooking the Passover sacrifice in the hot springs of Tiberias? Daha Pesach eno nechal rak b'Yerushalayim. Because we already know that in the times later, where of the temple times in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, when all of the Israelites were to bring their paschal offerings or buy the paschal offerings in Jerusalem at the temple and have them shechted and offered in the temple and eaten in Jerusalem. So how could it be that you would have a case where the paschal offering could be taken to Tiberias, which is in the north of the land of Israel, such that you could cook it in the hot springs of Tiberias? It's Eino nechal rak b'Yerushalayim. We only eat these in Jerusalem. V'im hevi'uhu l'Tiberia, and if you were to bring it to Tiberias, kvar nifsal mishum yotze, then it's already become disqualified. The paschal offering has become disqualified because you have violated a separate law called taking it out of Jerusalem. And then he says, maybe, what if you're actually bringing the hot spring water to Jerusalem? Ve'im heviu chamei Tiberia b'Yerushalayim, what if you bring it to Jerusalem? Kvar nitzdanein, it will have already cooled off by the time you bring it. So that can't be what we're talking about. Ve'od, and there's another problem with that. If you thought it was bringing the hot spring water to Jerusalem, the klishenihu, because if you would have had to taken some sort of kli, some vessel to transport the water, and once the hot spring water goes into this vessel, this pitcher or this bowl, the pitcher becomes what we call a secondary vessel, and we have a general rule that a kli shenihu ve'enu mevashel klal, nothing cooks in a secondary vessel, bracketing the fact that we say there's a couple things that do, but a Passover sacrifice would not be one of them. The lamb would not be one of them. So problematically, it doesn't make sense to the Mare Kohen what exactly this question would be dealing with. Now, the Mare Kohen says that he heard that question. He heard that question from someone he calls a Chacham Echad, Gadol Mechachmei Yerushalayim, a wise person who was one of the great wise people of Jerusalem of his era. And when he heard that question posed, Lo Tirates al Zeh Klum, this wise person was unable to answer or solve that question. This is what the father of the Mare Kohen heard. Kain Siperli Mar Abba. This is the father of the Mare of Bezalel Kohen reported this whole story. Now, Mare Kohen himself, Bezalel Kohen himself, tries to answer it. He says, Amnam la'anius daiti, it seems to me, yesh lomar b'pshitut demishkachat la b'shat heter habamot. He says, this makes sense back earlier in Jewish history when, for a brief period, it was allowable to have individual altars in your own property in the land of Israel, and people before the temple service in Jerusalem became the be-all and end-all and the only location for people to offer sacrifice to God. There was a time when you could have what were called bamot, individual altars, and maybe it makes sense, of course, says the Mare Kohen, that this was describing people who lived in Tiberias, so they were able to offer their paschal lamb in their own private altar and could have thought to cook it in the water, the hot waters, the hot springs of Tiberia, or as the Torah Temimah says, the steam that rises up on it. And according to our Gemara, in the eyes of the Torah of the Mare Kohen, the Gemara of Rav Chisda comes to exclude those people from doing that. You couldn't cook it in Tiberia on the hot springs. So that's the Mare Kohen in the back of the Gemara. Now, The Torah Temimah does not like that answer. Aval ani tameh. I do not get it. Why? Dilafize lama modianu hagamara koli kardin zeh. If, as the Mare Kohen, Rabbi Kohen says, that this is just to teach us about the time in Jewish history when there were individual altars, why does the Gemara have to tell us that? Hello, ma da have. Okay, what happened happened. Yes, there was this brief time in Jewish history where that was possible, but it's not possible now to offer individual offerings, and it's not going to be possible in the future. We believe that was a one-time event for one period, and it won't happen again. So that doesn't make sense to him, to the Torah Temimah, that would really be what the Gemara is saying. So he's going to suggest, based on the question of the Mare Kohen, a different understanding and reading of the Gemara of Rav Chisda in Tractate Pesachim, page 41a. Aval ani tama shelo he'eru zeh shekatav Rashi kan lefaresh halashon chamei Tiberia. I don't understand why the Mare Kohen, Betzalel Kohen, did not cite the teaching of Rashi in the Gemara here, who explains what he thinks the Gemara means when it talks about chamei Tiberia. Rashi, in Tractate Pesachim, on the phrase chamei Tiberia, the hot waters of Tiberias, says mayanot rotchim, boiling springs, hot springs, boiling spring water. Okay, so what's the Torah Temimah want to do with that? Lich'oira dvarim ele miyutarim. It seems on a first reading that these words are extraneous. Ki mi eno yodea sham Hashem chamei Tiberia, because who doesn't know what it means, the hot springs of Tiberias? Everyone knows what that means. Ela vadai mekevan lefare shekol mayanot rotchim bechol makom shehem. It must therefore be that Rashi is explaining the phrase chamei Tiberia to describe all hot springs in every place. Mekunim b'shem chamei Tiberia are called the hot springs of Tiberia. Whether you accept this reading or not, it's quite creative that the Torah Temimah is suggesting, based on Rashi's commentary in Pesachim 41a, that the term, the hot springs of Tiberia, is a general term which is synonymous for all hot springs. So what would that do? It means that when Rav Chisda says you can't cook the Paschal lamb in the hot springs of Tiberia, what he's really saying is you can't cook them in any hot springs. And so is that going to solve the question of the Mare Kohen, which the Torah Temimah seems to like the question of, are there hot springs? Where are the hot springs that are in Jerusalem, such that it would make this question relevant? V'im kein pashut necha, it makes simple sense. Tehakavana hamevashel b'mayanot rotchim im yimtzeu b'Yerushalayim. That the intent of this Gemara is one who would cook the Paschal sacrifice in boiling hot springs if they're found in Jerusalem. And so now, to conclude, the Torah Temimah has to show us that there are hot springs in Jerusalem. V'ra'aya machrechet, and there's a good proof to this. Deragil hagamara lichanot kol mayanot rotchim b'shem chamei Tiberia. There's a good proof text that the Gemara often would call any hot spring anywhere in the world, call it chamei Tiberia, hot springs of Tiberia. There is an Agadah, a rabbinic story, in Tractate Sanhedrin, page 108a. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan would say, Shlosha nishtairu mimei hamabul. There were 3 left over from the flood waters, the flood in the time of Noah, the first flood. Ratzon lomar gimel mine chamin ve'echad mehem chamei Tiberia, which is to say that there were 3 different types of hot springs left, and one of them is called Chamei Tiberia, the hot springs of Tiberia. Rashi there in that Gemara explains Shehamayanot shel dor hamabul hayu rotchin. There's an idea, midrashic idea, that the flood in Noah's time was itself a hot flood. That was the earth's hot springs rising up, so that it was boiling water which covered the earth. Umizeh nishtairu chamei Tiberia. And the hot springs of Tiberias are left over from that original flood. V'hine, Bal hamaymar hazeh havekemavor Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, who says this, ba'atzmo svirale, he himself says elsewhere in a Gemara in Zvachim, delo yarad klal mabul le'eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan elsewhere says he believes that the flood never engulfed the land of Israel. So now there's a question on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, if you say that there's 3 hot springs left over from the hot waters of the flood, and one of them is called Chamei Tiberia, the hot springs of Tiberia, and yet you yourself, Rabbi Yochanan, also say that the floodwaters of Noah's time never reached the land of Israel, then how could it be that Chamei Tiberia, the hot springs of Tiberias, which are in the land of Israel, are left over from that original flood? If you say the original flood never reached there. Elaim came the Chamei Tiberia, unless you say that the term hot springs of Tiberia, have a kinui, is simply a nickname. Lekol mayanot rotchim, for all hot springs, shebechol haolam, in all the world, afilu b'chutz la'aretz, even outside the land of Israel, v'haya hakavana shenishtairu, and that's what it means that they were left over, meaning all hot springs in the world were left over from the original flood. Vidok, says the Torah Temimah. Think about this very well. The Torah Temimah, this is a really brilliant solution to a difficult problem. Again, the problem was, why would the Gemara in Pesachim, Rav Chisda, have to deal with the issue of cooking the Paschal lamb in the hot springs of Tiberias when we know that just taking the lamb out of Jerusalem would disqualify it in the first place? This question was raised by the Mare Kohen, who heard it from his father, his father heard it as a question from a wise person of Jerusalem. The wise person of Jerusalem couldn't solve the problem. Mare Kohen offers the solution, which was that this was referring to a time in Jewish history when people could offer sacrifices anywhere they wanted in the land of Israel, including in Tiberia. The Torah Temimah did not like that answer, so proposes his own, namely that the term hot springs of Tiberias is a kinui, is a nickname, is a general term for all hot springs, and he proves that from comparing these 2 Gemaras, one in Sanhedrin, one in Zvachim, of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan calls Chamei Tiberia, the hot springs of Tiberias, leftovers from the hot flood of Noah. But Rabbi Yochanan also thinks that the hot flood of Noah never reached the land of Israel, so it must be that Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Yochanan believes that the term hot springs of Tiberias refers to all hot springs, which could mean the hot springs even in Jerusalem. Even though they call it the hot springs of Tiberia, it means any hot spring, including the hot springs in Jerusalem. So this is a lesson then Rav Chisda is teaching us, that if you were to find a hot spring in Jerusalem where you could conceivably cook your Paschal offering, the Pesach, in the steam rising up out of it, that was the Torah Temimah's first point. Don't do it. That's a violation of Tzli Eish, of having to cook your Paschal lamb to roast it in fire. We should merit to live these laws as they were meant to be lived soon and in our days. Always a pleasure learning with you. More next week.